The following is a real recording of a real coaching session. If you're interested in getting some coaching yourself, you can find the link in the description. Thanks and enjoy the video. So did you have anything in mind that you specifically wanted to look at today? Is it more structure stuff?
I want to look at the turbo structures and think I want to look at hand class, some like the really bottom of the barrel hand classes for just bluffing with air.
Okay.
Because did not have a good, I've had better weekends.
Okay. Fair enough.
What we just did, I was absolutely card dead, just fired off 3 bullets, and my first 2 bullets were gone before level 7.
Well, that's unfortunate. Obviously, it's always rough when it goes that way. But I guess the main question really is, how did you feel about the actual performance? You felt like you made good decisions?
I did in the beginning, but
okay,
I think the card deadness and got to me a little bit later. I ended up dumping basically the majority of my stack to the same player that was 2 to my right over the course of 15 minutes and 4 hands. And most of it was just I couldn't win a flip, which that happens. But I think that probably influenced my second bullet a little bit more than I maybe was I was maybe giving it credit for.
Sure.
There were 2 hands in particular that came up in my mind that I was iffy on whether or not I did the right thing.
Okay. Do you want to talk about any of the specific hands, or do you want to just dive into the concepts that you mentioned just now?
Let's jump into let's do those 2 first, because I think they're relatively simple spots.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm in the big blind. Blinds were 200, 400 at this point.
Okay.
I'm sitting at 30. I'm starting stack 30K-ish.
Sure.
Folds around to the button, just lost a massive all-in, so he's only got 4,200 left.
Okay. So he's got 10 bigs, basically.
Yeah,
right?
He's got like 10 bigs. He looks down. He rips it all in. Small blind folds. I've got king 9 offsuit. I called.
Okay. So your big blind, small blind rips it for 10 bigs?
No, I'm big blind. Button rips it.
The button rips it for 10 bigs. Okay.
And I watched him, and he'd squeezed my big blind twice prior to this interaction.
Yeah, I think you have to call. I don't think you can fault that.
Yeah,
I mean, it is the kind of call that it's annoying because a lot of players will not shove wide enough, and they'll shove hands that are supposed to just like min raise call off. They'll shove like some of their strong stuff, but I don't think you can fold king 9 now. There's just too many weak hands, I think.
Yeah, so he shoved, and I didn't think about it too much. I called. He flips over queen 3 offsuit, but spiked the queen, and so doubled him up there. And then 3 hands later, similar situation. I'm under the gun. Do most of an orbit. Gets back to me. I'm under the gun with jacks. I open jacks to I think I opened to 1,200 under the gun with jacks, and he rips it all in again for 10.2K this time. Off of in the cutoff, right? No, I'm under the gun. Yeah. So same thing. I call. He flips over ace king offsuit, spikes an ace, and then I'm down to 10ish. I'm down to 10ish less bigs, and some other dude finishes me off. I'm like, okay, I didn't feel like I was playing that bad. Just lost a couple of flips. So I go back to the rebuy line, and I get back in at 501K. So come back in with 30 bigs.
Okay.
I played 3 hands. Folded my started in the hijack, folded my first hand, button moves, sitting in the low jack, ace queen suited. It folds to me. I raise. The hijack 3 bets and the small blind flat the 3 bet. So the hijack 3 bets and the small blind jams 4 bet jams over the 3 bet. So I just muck it and watch kings versus ace king play out. And then third hand comes around. I'm now under the gun +1. I look down at pocket jacks. There's a limp in front of me from under the gun. Like I said, it's at 501K. I raise it to 5K. Folds around to the small blind, who 3-bet squeezes to 8K, and then the under the gun limper flats the 3-bet. And this is where I think I screwed up. I feel like
you made it 5.
I made it 5.
How did they click it back to 8? Because that's less than a min raise.
No, sorry, it was 11. It was a weird number. That's what it threw me off, that it was a weird number.
Okay.
So clicks it to 11. The gun flats the 3-bet after limping, and this is where I think I screwed up. I just flatted. I should have jammed there.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's just too much in the pot at that point. Like the small blind 3-bet is not going to be. It's a strong hand, like just always a strong hand there, but there's just so much in the pot that it's really difficult to have enough confidence that it specifically is always queens plus, that you can do anything other than shove there. I think
Yeah.
there's
So
because you had how much stack wise?
still had 30K.
Like
Like I was starting with 30.
30K. Oh yeah. When they make it 11, like there's not really much room to flat there at all, to be honest. And there's just such a great overlay there. Like maybe you have maybe there's like some small frequency that somehow the small blind folds and then the under the gun player calls with like eights or something, and you just get this crazy good spot. So there's just a lot of good things that can happen. So I think we'll just be all in there.
Yeah. So mistake number one was flatting there, and then the board comes and it's 7, 8, 9.
Oh, you're just all in there. There's just no getting away from that.
Small blind leads for 5K there. And then the under the gun player flats the 5K.
I mean, it's a great
And
spot
then I
now.
just
Like
rip
you're
it.
just all in, of course.
Yeah,
and then the small blind just has aces or something, probably.
No, but he's got 9s.
Oh,
so
okay, whatever.
I had
Yeah.
outs. I was hoping for a 10. What was funny was he calls my all in, and the under the gun guy is tanking, and he tanks for probably a minute and a half before he flashes king 10 offsuit and then folds. And that was one of those ones where, like, when he flashed the hand, I was just kind of like, "What? Okay, text. Yeah,
you know what's
poker.
You know what's funny is if he does get into that spot with king 10 off, he probably isn't supposed to fold. Like against the ranges that you and the small blind have, when he has an open ender there, probably has to call. But like it's whatever. It doesn't matter. The only thing I would probably say there is that I think against an under the gun limp there, I think 5x might be a little bit big to ISO off of only like 30 bigs. I think if you're deep, like if you're 100 deep, even 60 deep, I think 5x is probably fine. But I think 30, I think you probably just go 3.5, maybe 4. It's splitting hairs. It doesn't matter a ton, but it's just something to note that putting 5 bigs in it's quite a chunk of your stack, and it makes it. You want to make sure that everybody behind you knows there's at least some possibility that you're folding. And I think when you make it 5 and you have 30 in your stack, it's like you probably aren't folding. That's just something to be aware of. But yeah, just it's cooler. I think we would just be all in pre, and we would have ended up with the same result. But I think the under the gun player calling just puts it in, just makes it such a great spot where it's almost a spot where I can't imagine any hand there being better as a call than as a jam, just because there's such an overlay that. And sometimes this is something that happens with multi-way pre-flop stuff as well. Like depending on how big the stacks of the other two players are, sometimes you get stuff like you shove for 30K over the 11 and the call. And then if the small blind and the under the gun player both have, let's say like 80K, the small blind is going to shove to isolate you and shut the under the gun player out of the pot. So you get to play a heads up all in against the small blind when there's 11K of just pure dead money in there and the gun player folds. So anytime you're looking at any sort of uneven stack situation like that, you do run into situations like this where if you're the shorter stack, you benefit from one of the other deeper stacks, like forcing the other one out of the pot and letting you play heads up with an overlay. You see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So that can happen. But one way or the other, it's not a huge deal, just a cooler.
Yeah. So it was just
unfortunate.
Yeah. And my third bullet on the higher buy-in tournament a day and a half later just busted just aces versus ace king on an ace king deuce board.
That's rough.
Like I had aces, he had ace king suited. He had ace king of diamonds. There was only one diamond on the board. Turn, diamond, river, diamond. And it was just like, oh, all right. And that was at like 200, 400. So that was like like 100 something big by pot. I was like, all right. And that was the moment where I was kind of like, I'm just going to go home and I think I'm going to be done for this weekend.
Sure. Yeah, I don't blame you. That's a rough one. That's a really tricky one. So let's talk a little bit about those structures that you were mentioning. What's you mentioned you're playing these turbo events. What's the difference in structure between the turbo events and the others other than just shorter levels? Is there any difference?
I don't, from what I can see, and I'll put the link to the structure sheets in the chat here real quick, just that way it's a lot easier to pop through them.
Let me just open a screen share so that it shows up on the footage at the end anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I think
there you go. So
from a structure perspective, it's roughly the same, except it's just shorter levels. They basically permanently skip the 300, 500. Like they just,
okay. So they just seem to always, this is the 1100. This is the main event buy-in. Okay.
Yeah, the main event. I'm looking at the WPT free roll satellite.
Okay, September 30th.
Yep, that one.
Wait, that's a week ago, isn't it? Or is this another one? Is it repeating, like it's coming up soon or what?
Find another one. What is today, the 8th? there?
It doesn't matter. If it's going to be the same structure, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, so they are skipping the 500 and they're also skipping the 5K, which is, that definitely sucks. We've got like 12-minute breaks, 15-minute break at the completion of the first 8 levels. You start with 15K in chips and you start at, it's one of these weird rebuy ones. It's like an old school rebuy one. Okay, so you can rebuy, you get $20 for 10K in tournament chips. Okay, and it's a $30 entry fee.
Yep.
I see. Okay.
And you can rebuy up to 5 times at once.
Wow. Okay. So a maximum add-on of 50K chips for $100. All right. So the weird thing about satellites like this, right, is that the ICM value of these add-ons and everything is directly correlated with how many chips you have at that point. So it's funny because we used to do studies on stuff like this with the old sit and goes that I used to play online. I used to play these 180-man sit and goes on PokerStars, and they used to have these like $3 rebuy ones.
Yep, loved those.
Yeah, it's back in the day. But everybody had a different philosophy on how to play those. Some people were like never rebuy, never add on. Some people were like always add on at the beginning and blah, blah, blah. But what really matters is if you have, let's say you are at the end of the rebuy period and you're going into the add-on, and you have a tiny stack, then the value of going from, 3 big blinds to 15 or something by adding on could be quite significant. But if you have 50 bigs, then adding on and going from 50 to 60 is nothing. Like, it doesn't matter. So the way that I would look at this is start out and don't rebuy at all. And then if you reach a point where you get shallow, $20 for 10K in chips is really valuable, right? That's the way I would look at it, is look at the rebuys and the add-on or like the max rebuy or whatever it is. And then also the maximum add-on of 50K chips for 100. I would just look at that as the shorter you are when you get to that point, the more important it is to take that. And then if you happen to get to that point and you have a bunch of chips, don't take it. If you're like above average, don't take it, because the ICM value of that is going to be pretty minimal if you already have a lot of chips. And this is one of the weird things about satellites that people don't really recognize, is that the like max ROI way to handle them is you basically are, because there's so little incentive to like accumulate chips and actually win the tournament or have a big stack or anything like that. Your goal is basically to get in as cheaply as possible and survive as much as you can. And just, your goal is to sneak your way into a seat. That's like the most profitable way to approach satellites, which is why they're such a crappy format when they're not like a milestone format, because you just don't get to play any poker. It's just like a folding contest. So I hate satellites personally, but this kind of event does seem like it's probably really good value. And it's obviously a good thing that they're running them, because it's going to really do a good boost for the field of the event in December. So there's definitely a lot of value here. But I would say, as far as the structure goes, like the structure itself is just going to be a fast structure, crapshooty kind of thing. It's just going to be a lot of short stack stuff, kind of like we talked about before. But the general idea of how to handle the add-ons and the re-entries is you want to keep in mind that obviously $20 for 10K in chips is not in a vacuum. If you're paying $20 for 50 big blinds, it's easy to think 50 big blinds is a lot of big blinds. So that's good, right? But then the problem is that early in the tournament, especially in a satellite, having 50 big blinds extra in your stack just doesn't really mean anything. So you would be best off just looking at it as, I'm just going to go in with the minimum stack and I'm just going to try to like spin it up. Just going to play normally, just play however the situation demands that you play. And then if you get short, take a rebuy so that you're not short anymore. And then just keep doing it when you get fairly short, and just recognize that the value of those add-ons and those additional chips that you're paying for is decreased the more chips you already have. And then if you do bust, obviously just re-enter and just treat it normally like that. But that's probably the best way to handle this, I think. And then from there, it just becomes a normal, like I say, a folding contest, like a satellite normally is.
So and this is where this gets interesting. So this format is basically this is their every Tuesday night tournament, and every Tuesday
Okay.
night is like a 20 or 30K guarantee. With
Yeah.
the structure doesn't change. It's just instead of it being a satellite, it's just a so how does that change with the concept of is it better? Is this one of those ones where it's like better to start at the beginning and try and build a stack or max late reg? Because the total chip stack when you max late reg is 135K starting stack is what you start with at that point, which is around it's around 80 bigs
Yeah.
ish, but it's going to cost you I think like $285. So it's basically a $285 30K
Yeah.
guarantee.
So what I would say for that then is that it still comes down to each additional portion of chips is worth less, right? The value of a stack that just gets you in the tournament by max late regging, like the value of max late regging for, I guess it would be probably 10 bigs or less than 10 bigs. Like that max late reg might not be that valuable, but let's say if you were to do, I don't know, 2 rebuys or something, if you were to get in for $80 for 25 bigs or something, like that's really good. So the general idea that you want to think of is that in a regular structured tournament, you obviously have much more incentive to try to actually win as opposed to just cash the tournament. But even playing from the start, even though playing from the start maximizes your chances of winning relative to just maximizing your chances of cashing, let's say, it still really isn't that big of a deal. And we still don't really have especially good math on like how much impact early registration versus late actually makes, because it all just comes down to what your win rate is in the early levels, right? If you're the best player in the field at deep stacks, you should probably play the early levels. But if you are not that experienced in deep stacks or not that comfortable, then, the advantage that you gain by playing them is minimal. So that's the way that I would look at it. In a really soft tournament like this, yeah, someone who studies like you is probably going to benefit quite a bit from playing the early levels, but it's also not really a disaster if you don't play them. And if the event is a satellite, then the benefit of playing them is reduced even further because you just don't really have to do very much to try to maximize your chances of winning. The other kind of useful thing is in the satellite version of this, like I'd imagine with all the rebuys and everything, the early levels are probably going to be very volatile with people just getting chips in like randomly almost, because that does happen a lot in a lot of low buy-in events in the early stages. So you just benefit a lot from not even being in the event and not being subject to, there's no variance that you take on when you're not even in the tournament yet. Like you don't have to, you can't rebuy if you haven't even bought it in the first time yet. So other people are just going to be, they're just going to be firing money into the prize pool. And you're just like, it's almost like if you play day one, I always love this when you play day 1A and you bag, and now you're just like sitting there watching everybody play day 1B and 1C, and you've already bagged, and there's just more money going into the prize pool. In a satellite, in a context like this, especially when there's rebuys and stuff, max late reg is a bit like that. It's a bit like you already know you're going to be in there when, so you're just waiting for other people to just fire a bunch of money into the prize pool that maybe they're not even really benefiting that much from EV wise. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. So good event, reasonable structure. Just does suck that they missed that 500 level, but not really a huge deal. Just be ready for a lot of short stack play.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Definitely going to be pretty short.
Yeah. Oddly and ironically enough, the stuff I'm most comfortable with, 20 big blinds or less.
Yeah, that's good, right? It's going to put you in your comfort zone. So that's nice. Talk me through, I'm just going to open up a spot here that we can use as a good example. But while I'm doing that, talk me through what it was that made you feel like you wanted to study some of those situations where we're barreling with no equity, or why those are useful situations that you wanted to study.
So honestly, it was something that was coming to me because when you're card dead, you do a lot of folding. When you got a lot of folding, you got a lot of time to think.
Yeah, of course.
And it happened that I was listening to, I had a Joy of Poker on in my headset while I was doing that to keep myself grounded as much as I could.
Yeah, of course.
And it just occurred to me that there were a couple of spots that came up where I had a hand pre-flop that may not have been the greatest, but I also recognized that so the table I was at was an interesting table because the two guys to my right, I recognized they're regs. Like I've played against them a lot. I've played with them a lot. They're competent players.
Sure.
But the 4 players to my left were all Rex.
Okay.
And they were weak Rex. That's where the the sixes hand that I posted in the Discord,
Yeah.
the reason that came to my mind was like I recognized immediately within the dynamic of the table that like, oh, I can do this here because I know for a fact, unless somebody spikes that queen on the river, which I doubt, we're gonna fold I'm gonna get a pair of tens to fold out, a pair of jacks to fold. Like I'm gonna get better to fold here. I recognized that the players to my left were weak, and I wanted to find spots to try and exploit that when the players to my right had exited the field. The problem was I was getting a lot of jack 5 off, jack 4 off, queen 3 off, and then some of I saw like a couple suited kings in like middle position. So it was one of those moments where it's okay. I recognize that, okay, I know there are moments where some of these hands do play outside of the big blind, but I have basically ignored that section of my game completely. So there were a number of moments that showed up where I'm like, I know I could do something here, but I don't know what. And because I don't know what, I'm not gonna try right now because I could get myself in like I could get myself in really bad shape if I don't know what I'm doing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So the way I would look at it, and I'll just go back to a pre-flop spot here before we start to go into some post-flop scenarios, is let's say I'm just going to go with 30 bigs deep, and we look at what we're going to do, let's say in the hijack here, right? If we were dealing with opponents behind us where we're thinking like, okay, these are weak players, we're going to make some adaptations here. What we would start with is the most important player is the big blind, because that's the player that you're going to be up against the most frequently. They're going to be the most common player that's actually going to be in this pot against you. So if the big blind is either playing really badly post flop, or if the big blind is overfolding their big blind pre-flop, then you're going to be able to certainly justify opening wider in a situation like this, right? So what I would do there is just open a cutoff range, just like literally just take one position later, right? Open a cutoff range from the hijack. If you're in the cutoff, open a button range from the cutoff. Same thing, right? But one thing that can temper that a little bit is, even though it's a good thing that if the cutoff and the button, for example, are weaker players, they're not going to be 3-betting as much and so on. The thing is that if they are, let's say, a bit too passive, they may not be 3-betting that much, but they are actually going to call and play in position against you post-flop at some frequency to a degree that maybe doesn't incentivize you to open certain hands. So what I would do there is, if I was going to open up because of the big blind, but then I'm going to temper it a little bit by just catering to the cutoff and the button, I would take, okay, let's say we take a cutoff range. So we're going to open this range from the hijack now, but the parts of this range that are particularly difficult to play post-flop out of position, that particularly realize equity quite badly, I'm going to drop out. So in this case, I would drop out like ace 5 off through ace 7 off probably. I would drop out like king 9 off to 10 9 off. And then I might even add in like the suited queens, or I might even add in, I definitely would add in deuces. I would add in 6-4, probably 8-5, maybe stuff like that. Just adding in some of the more suited stuff and dropping out some of the offsuit stuff so that our frequency is still going to be higher than normal. It's not going to be quite as high. We're opening a bit of a hybrid between a hijack range and a cutoff range. So like we'd hover over the hijack here, the range that's down there in the hijack and the range that's up here in the cutoff, we're opening something in between that 29% and 37, so 33 or 34%. But what we're doing is we're specifically opening a range that's more heavy on suited hands and less heavy on offsuit hands, because it's going to make sure that if we do get flattered by these players who are quite passive, we're going to be able to maximize the post-flop playability that we have. And we're not going to be stuck in too many situations where we're out of position with easily dominated hands that are offsuit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what I would do. I would just shift in favor of the suited stuff. And a pretty good rule of thumb really is, if you're dealing with a table where you know that people are playing outside the norm, if post-flop play is going to happen less often, so if you're going to see people either folding too much or 3-betting more, then your opening range is going to want to shift more towards basically offsuit high cards, or just more high card heavy in general, which suited or offsuit doesn't really matter, because either you're going to get more folds or you're going to be blocking the hands that are going to 3-bet you, both of which are good things. And if post-flop play is going to happen more often because either people are just too wide or they're just very passive in general, they're not folding enough, then you don't necessarily have to tighten up a lot. You just have to make sure that your opening range is more built around hands that have post-flop playability. So more suited hands, more connected stuff, and less of the offsuit high card stuff. So less of the offsuit ace-x, less of that offsuit king-9, stuff like that, right? You just shift in one direction or the other, dependent on where the general dynamic of the table is going, or at least the dynamic of the players left to act behind you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So that's the adjustment that we would want to go with, I think, there. And that's going to be pretty reliable across a lot of situations. There's not too many spots where that sort of approach doesn't really hold true, that more post-flop play means we want more suited hands and more playability, and less post-flop play means we want more high card hands and more blocker power, basically. That's the way to go. And that applies to 3-bets as well. The more likely it is you're going to have to go post, the more equity and playability you're going to want. That all seem reasonable?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then of course there are just going to be situations where you just can't do anything. There are going to be spots where, you know, you just get dealt a bunch of opponents that don't know what they're doing, but you just don't get dealt any hands, and that's part of the game too. So the next part beyond that, I think, was you mentioned wanting to look at situations where you get post flop and you just have air and you're not really sure, can I barrel off or something like that. So
yeah, so I think a good setup would be like if we took cutoff range versus big blind and focus in on bottom of range, the king-9, queen-9, jack-9 off, the queen-5, king-4 suited, and looking at how those play out versus big blind's basically deck.
Yeah. Sorry. I pretty much did that already. So what I've got here is I've got like a button versus big blind, 60 big blind spot, just to see how we're doing when we're a little bit deeper. And I've got 3 different boards. I've got a rainbow paired board, so like a really static board. We've got King Jack 4 here, which is obviously 2 Broadway, 2-tone, and then we've got a 10-8 deuce monotone. Now, all 3 of these boards are boards where even from the button with a wide range, we can range bet. These are all range bet boards, and I specifically picked them from the aggregate report because they were all showing up as range bet boards, right? So we'll start with the rainbow board, and we'll just focus particularly on a lot of the weakest hands. So we're range betting this board, and we're just going to look at what happens on the later streets. And the cool thing that I like doing by looking at hole cards like this, we can give ourselves a certain hole card pair. So let's pick a hand you want to know what to do with on the turn here. Let's say you bet.
Let's go with King 3 of hearts.
Okay, King 3 of hearts. So we're going to have King 3 of hearts here, and we're going to go to the turn. Villain's going to call. Oops. Oh, we need a turn card. That's funny. Just put a 7 of clubs up there, and the 7 of clubs doesn't really matter too much, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the runouts tab to see what this specific hand does on the turn after villain checks, specifically across runouts. So if we go to show runouts, it's going to tell us what King 3 of hearts is specifically doing. And I think what you'll probably find is there's actually some principles that are a bit more clear and a bit more easy to figure out than what they might seem. So if we take a look and we sort by checking frequency, there's quite a few things that we can immediately establish, right? In fact, I'm going to sort by suit just to make it a little easier. And then, suit and then by rank. This is where it gets a little bit easier. What do you notice from this bottom section here with the overall hand strategies for King 3 of hearts? What jumps out at you immediately?
Let's see. We're basically checking spades. We're checking almost all spades. We're betting all heart. We're checking all spades, betting all hearts. So we're betting all hearts, basically checking everything else. And then
I would say the most obvious thing there is we're always betting on a heart, right? Like the only heart that we're not betting is a 4 because that double pairs the board, which makes sense. And then beyond that, if we look at the non-heart hands that we are betting, let's just sort by rank first of all. Actually, no, let's not sort by rank. Let's sort by aggression. And then we will sort by, oh, no, not even aggression. We want to sort by check. There we go. And then by suit. Let's do that. Okay, so that doesn't matter. So you can see the hearts here all on the right-hand side. Like the heart cards are the ones that we are betting at the highest frequency for sure. Outside of a heart here, then we want to look at the ranking of cards where we have some level of aggression. A king fairly obvious card to play aggressively, right? We turn top pair. So that's fine. That's nice and easy. Then we've got a deuce of spades, which is unconventional, but it's in there. Six of spades, five of spades, jack of spades, six of clubs. So some of these cards that are fairly disconnected from the board, but do maybe there's a couple of potential straight draw cards that can interact with those cards. Those, we have some barrel power on those. And then there's just small amounts on some of the stuff like a queen, a seven, things like that. And on a lot of these other cards, an ace, a 10, a 4, like 9 or 8 of diamonds, all sorts of stuff like that. We just don't barrel at all. So ultimately, it wouldn't even be that big of an error here to just always bet a heart and a king and then check everything else.
Right.
Now, it would be a slight error. Like, it would be a bit of a mistake to not bet. Like, you can see, like, on a deuce of spades, like a king, or sorry, six of spades. Yeah, it's a bit of a mistake to miss this bluff there. But even if we did miss all those bluffs, it wouldn't be like the biggest disaster. And this is actually going to be true with a lot of these other cards here. If we look at a different hand, pick a different hand besides king 3 of hearts here.
Jack 9, jack of clubs, 9 of spades.
Okay, jack of clubs, 9 of spades. So it has to be a hand that's in our range, which jack 9 offsuit is here. So that's fine. This is where it gets kind of interesting, right? Take a look at that. What do you notice about that? Let's actually sort by suit now, just to see if there's any definitive trends there. What jumps out at you there for the jack 9 offsuit?
Jesus.
We're doing a lot more, right? We're doing a lot more aggressing, right? There's a lot more obvious aggression here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we then sort by rank, let's say, and then sort by suit, there's a couple things we can start to see now that maybe jump out just a little bit. Is there anything that you can notice that maybe is a bit more of a trend as far as something we can use to guide us here as far as when we're going to bet the turn?
So it looks like we're betting on a lot of straight completion cards, whether we make the straight or not.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
we bear in mind this 7 is just a placeholder turn here. So we're not going to actually make a straight. We're going to pick up a straight draw. So on a king, a queen, 9, we pick up second pair, but a king, a queen, an 8, a 7, we pick up a straight draw. And you can see those are very good cards for us to bet. Those are definitely cards that we can bet a bit more aggressively. So that's certainly one trend already that is meaningful there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if we look at suit and sort by suit and then according to rank, then we see a couple of things as well, right? You can see that there's a bit of a difference between a spade,
spades, and
or
everybody else.
Spade or a club, right? Spades and clubs are similar here. And then diamonds and hearts are also similar to each other. And you'll notice that we have a club and a spade in our hand. So that's another factor that's going to be somewhat important here. The suits in our hand are going to slightly guide our aggression across the future streets because they're going to slightly influence the blocking power that our hand has against some portions of our opponent's range. So we are going to find that from time to time, just taking the suits in our hand and saying, okay, when I have a club and a spade, I'm going to barrel on a club or a spade, and I'm going to check when it's not a club or a spade. That is reasonable there. But it is harder with offsuit hands in some cases. So there can be some pretty difficult stuff that happens there, especially because you don't have necessarily a clear blocker or unblocker to some of the continuing hands. Like sometimes you can, with some offsuit hands, you can have a blocker and an unblocker. So like on a club, let's say if we give ourselves a club and a diamond, right? The frequencies are going to be fairly similar across all turns, but you can see like the club, we're still betting a lot. We're also betting a lot more on a diamond now, but we're also still betting quite a lot on a spade, right? Because the spade is the fourth suit that comes up there. There's some nuance there as well, as far as the spade specifically being a card that we're going to barrel a bit more on. So it's not like the offsuit hands are some of the most difficult ones to figure out. But at the same time, some of the offsuit hands, they're going to be a bit more obvious. If we look at ace 9 is, this one's pretty easy, right? Look at this. We've got aggression wise, it's fairly simple. We've got, oh no, actually, sorry, we want check. There we go. Yeah, checking frequency. This one's pretty easy, right? Every turn except for specifically sometimes a jack, an ace, a 9, And then if the turn also brings trips, we can bet on a 10. There's only a few turn cards that we have to bet with ace 9 off here. And everything else we just check. There's a lot of pretty simple checks there. And if we look at some other hands, actually, let me throw one to you. If we have, let's say we give ourselves 9-7 of diamonds, what turn cards do you think we would bet there? Or what turn cards would we bet the most often?
9-7 of diamonds. We're probably going to be betting diamonds. We're going to be betting a 9 and 8, a 7, a 6.
Okay. Yeah.
A jack. Yeah.
Seems pretty reasonable. Yeah. I mean, we're pretty accurate with that, right? Except there's actually a bit more aggression than you might think here. We've got not really a lot of checking. In fact, the only cards that we are checking, we're checking a 7 a lot. We're checking a 9 a fair amount when we turn a 9. The queen of diamonds we're also checking sometimes, which is a little bit odd, a little bit interesting. But there's a lot of draws that we can turn here, right? We turn a draw on a jack. We turn a draw on a 6. So there's a lot of aggression overall. And if we look at suit and then by rank, you can definitely see that the diamond is a pretty heavy aggression card for us. The only cards that we do check would be a king or a queen sometimes. And then the other 3 suits are all pretty much equivalent to each other when we have 7-9 of diamonds. So if we then start to sort by rank and then by suit, you can see that like a 5, for example, pretty high frequency bet. A 3 or a deuce, we're over betting a lot. A 6, fairly high frequency. An 8, pretty high frequency there. Jack, fairly high. Queen, king, ace. There's just a lot of turn cards that we're betting at a pretty high frequency. And these are complicated spots, obviously, so there's not like any super easy trends that we start to see develop. But you can see that there's a fair bit of a shift towards, first and foremost, when we pick up equity, we're much more likely to bet, right? We're much more likely to continue when we pick up some equity. But to flesh out what we do or what the principles look like when we don't pick up any equity, let's find a turn card that we're betting with the 9-7 at a high frequency where we don't really pick up any equity at all. Let's find actually, this is a good one, the queen of spades, right? Queen of spades here. This is almost a pure bet for a 9-7 of diamonds, despite the fact we pick up no equity at all on the queen of spades. Let's try to explore why this hand might bet in this spot and what our overall range looks like. The first thing is to just observe what the general strategy is here. What jumps out at you as a whole here, looking at this turn on a queen of spades here? Anything?
Well, it's still a range bet for our position. Our specific.
Well, it's not a range bet because we've got 37% checks here. So right. We're betting it's about 60-40, right? Give or take 2/3, 1/3, something like that. But the first thing to take note of in a lot of cases is where's the value region, right? Where's the value threshold above which we can start to value bet? And in fact, it's relatively easy here because if you look, pretty much the majority of Queen X plus is betting here. There's some checking, obviously, but almost every 10 is betting. Some full houses and some pocket aces are trapping a little bit, but a lot of Queen X is betting as well. Queen 4 specifically is checking because it blocks the 4. But you can see that really anything Queen X or better, we can at least consider value betting. And then we also have kind of a pretty clear region of hands that's in this middle area of under pair. We've got some third pair that's actually betting, but it's actually value-y. So I'll explore that in a second. But we got some third pair that's betting, but we got low pair, we got ace high. A lot of this region is checking here. Now, the thing that I'm really interested in is like the 7s, 6s, and 5s, because I would suspect if 7s is betting, I imagine that means it's value betting. Yeah, okay. So villain has to call with a 4 here, right? Villain is not able to fold a 4 on this turn, or at least they can only fold 4-3 and 4 deuce that don't have a kicker that plays. So right. In the end, that's creating this dynamic here of why we can actually, it's not even just that we can value bet all Queen X plus, we can actually value bet 7s, 6s, and 5s as well, and even ace 4. Because they have the ability to get value from a 4, but they also have some blocking power. Sorry, they also have some need for protection because they're very prone to getting counterfeited. Pocket 7s or whatever can easily get counterfeited on the river or lose to a better pair. So we are value betting quite a bit there, but in particular, this low pair and ace high region, this stuff is checking high frequency, right? Ace, king, ace, jack are bluffing sometimes because they turn that gut shot. But outside of that, if we focus on let's focus on the king high and below region. this is where it starts to get interesting, right? Because we've got a lot of hands that are mixing frequencies here at quite a good rate. You can see that the straight draws are pretty high frequency bets. Overall, all of the straight draws are betting at some pretty decent frequency, right? So in fact, I don't know if we need to really think about the straight draws. We can just think about, there's all the king high hands are here, but we don't need to include the very strong ones. We can just look at getting rid of those. It's king jack offsuit. Let's get rid of that as well. Yeah, okay. So this is king 9 plus. That's also a straight draw. Let's try to, still king 9, king 9. Just want to get rid of everything king 9 plus there. Still king 9. Maybe it's here. No, it's still king 9. King 8. All right, cool. So this is everything specifically king 8 and below, right? And there's a couple of interesting parameters that we might be able to apply. Is there anything, just looking at this and looking at the trends in terms of what portion of this range likes to bet versus what portion slightly prefers to check? Is there anything that you can notice here as far as anything that jumps out at you?
I feel like this has something to do with being able to block potential straight draws.
Partially, that's not nothing. It's not a non-zero, it's not a non-existent factor. But there's one thing that I think is a little bit more important, and it relates to having a low card in our hand, right? The 9x is, or the 9x, the jack x, the king x, it is somewhat important. But you can also see that if we don't have some kind of blocker to some of those straight draws, then we don't particularly like having low cards in our hand, right? You can see that we're less inclined, it's not zero, but we're less inclined to bet this turn with king 3, king deuce, 5-3, 6-5, 7-5, 7-6. And a lot of that is going to relate to figuring out what is the region of hands that villain is going to fold to our bet here. And this is something that Sam Laskowitz was talking about in his alliance session. It's that we want to be targeting the folding range. We want to be unblocking the folding range. So if we look at what villain does against this size, this is the region of hands that they're folding, right? And the biggest chunk of that folding range is a couple of different categories of hands. It's ace high. There's a lot of ace high that's folding, right? When they fold, 51% of their folding range is ace high. And that's why we're not doing a lot of barreling with our own ace highs. We also,
yeah, that makes sense.
We're also, when they fold, 12% of the time they have a straight draw. So clearly having that straight draw blocker, like you said, does mean something for sure. And then they've got 25% king high as well. But a lot of that king high is king high with an 8 or lower as a kicker. And so in the end, if we want to look at specifically what the benefit of something like a king 3 might have, if we look at, let's look at card matching here. If we let's figure out what percentage or what part of their folding range has the 3 of hearts specifically. So when they have the 3 of hearts in their hand, actually, let's just do this. Well, I'm highlighting the folding range. So when they have the 3 of hearts in their hand, they're folding 64% of the time, right? A big chunk of the hands that have the 3 of hearts in their hand are folding. But if we look at like the 9 of diamonds, let's say, when they have the 9 of diamonds in their hand, they are calling 68% of the time, right? Any hand that has the 9 of diamonds in it, inherently the 9 of diamonds is a card that if we have it, it's actually a very good blocker here, right? Because when they have that card in their hand, they're going to be calling a lot. There's not that many folding hands that have the 9 of diamonds in them. And if we look at the 7 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds not as good. When they have the 7 of diamonds in their hand, they're folding 2/3 of the time. So the 7 of diamonds is not quite the same. Now, with the blockers tab, what this does is this specifically removes these cards from the deck, basically. So this is a little bit less useful because it's not telling us how this player plays with a certain card. It's just telling us if we had those cards, like what effect does it have on their overall range? So if we have 9-7 of diamonds here, it does have a minimal effect. All it really does is the frequencies stay the same for the most part. There really isn't anything that actually changes in terms of when we have specifically this hand. But the card matching principles there do end up becoming pretty relevant. And it does make sense that when we have the 9 of diamonds in particular, it's a pretty good bluffing candidate, or it's a pretty good card for us to have in our hand when we bluff. So we want to look out for what the cards are that are favorable here. If we were to look at, let's say, the jack of diamonds, if we had like jack deuce of diamonds, they are now folding less when they have the jack or the deuce of diamonds. So this is a good card for us to bluff with, because this is a card that would influence them to call more, and so on. So there's a variety of different things that we can look at here. But generally speaking, the unblocking factor, the idea of we don't want to be blocking their folds, is quite relevant. And that's why just specifically having an ace or king here would generally be bad. And also having a 7, 6, 5, 3 deuce, generally that sort of thing would be somewhat negative as well. Now, if we look at a different texture, something like this king jack 4 here, and we pick like some trashy hands, there's a couple of things that we can see, or that we can observe, that are a little bit different on a board like this. So let's say we give ourselves 9-8 of spades, because this is a very trashy hand on this board. And again, it's a range bet flop. Oh, we're going to have to put a turn up there. Most likely what I would expect to see here is we're probably going to barrel this card or this hand a lot on a lot of the brick turns. And so we're going overbet on this particular turn card. If we go show runouts, let's see where we are at. There's probably going to be, yeah, so there's a lot of checking here with this hand. Check, there we go. So a lot, yeah, check on an 8, check on a 9, makes sense. Check on a king, check on a deuce or a 3. We're not bluffing this hand very often on a deuce or a 3. We are bluffing it sometimes on some stuff like a queen, an ace, that sort of thing, because we are going to be blocking certain combos there. We're going to be blocking some of the hands that continue on some of those turns. A 10 also obviously very good, because we do pick up an open ender there. A 7, even better. So clearly the best turn cards for us to barrel, you can see very clearly, are the ones where we pick up equity, right? When we pick up an open ender, we bet the 7, we bet the 10. Then you've got secondary equity here. We pick up a queen, little bit similar. And then the ace looks like the main one that we actually barrel that isn't actually giving us any equity. But yeah, actually a little bit more checking than I thought on some of the brick cards here. If we were to give ourselves something like queen, let's give ourselves like queen 3 of hearts here, something really weak. Like this one's interesting because again, we have a low card in our hand. Having a low card in our hand is a really nice thing to look out for, because there's a lot of board textures where just having a 3 or something in your hand is a nice unblocker, because your opponent isn't calling the flop with very many hands that contain a 3 in it, like especially the 3 of hearts here. There's very few hands that your opponent calls the flop with that have this card in them. So when you have it, it's nice and convenient to bluff the turn with this card. So you can see we're basically just always bluffing a deuce here, a 6, a 5, a 10, a 9. Just a lot of these spades and hearts, really, it looks like. A lot of that stuff. We've also got, obviously, a 10 when we pick up an open ender is fine. A king, where I guess we just block king, queen there. But a hand that has a low card like this, a lot more inclined to do quite a bit of bluffing. And high card, low card hands do have this sort of tendency, like I say. If we have 10-3, what would do we have 10-3 in range? We do have 10-3 in range. Even 10-3, like 10-3 here is a pretty aggressive hand. And if you compare it to 10-8, yeah, 10-8 is much less aggressive. So if you're looking for kind of a rule of thumb, like picking up equity is good, but also you generally don't love having 2 middle cards. That's just like a pretty sort of reasonable approach here, that high card, low card hands are generally good. Although that may not be the truth with ace high. So if we look at ace 8 of hearts, yeah, ace high just doesn't want to bet very much. Ace 3 of hearts, that is, yeah, ace 3 is betting more than ace 8 for obvious reasons, like we just said. We are betting sometimes when we turn bottom pair or turn third pair, just as a bluff there for a 2-pair blocker sort of thing. So we're betting sometimes with ace high, but we were betting more often with the queen 3 than we are with the ace 3. And you could see that 10-3 was also a pretty good bet. Now, if we look finally at a monotone board, this is one where obviously there's a lot of hands that don't have the ability to pick up any equity, really. Like we can pick up some on some turn cards, but if we give ourselves something like the king 3 of diamonds here, oops, forgot to put a turn card up there again, deuce of spades. I don't know why it's freezing. There we go. Okay. In this case, obviously we are with a suited hand, we're not really going to be able to turn any equity at any significant frequency unless we turn straight draws. So with something like King 3, let's see where the trend lies. And there it is. So we sort by checking. What jumps out at you here about King 3? Are you surprised by how much aggression there is?
Yes, but it's also the thing where that's something that does, I feel like, that does feel a little bit more naturally on a monotone board. It's okay. The things in the overly simplistic thought process that goes through my head is, okay, if it's monotone board, then they either flopped it or they didn't. So this is an excuse to be more aggressive, because if they flopped it, then you're just going to get called off. But if they didn't flop it, you're more likely to get scared hands, weaker hands to either think or fold out.
I see where you're coming from. I think we're not quite there to a fully fleshed out process for that there, but you're not completely along the wrong lines there. I think the add-on that I would make there really is that the thing that changes on these monotone types of boards is, you're right that there's a lot of hands that either have it or they don't, but there's also a lot of like single card flush draws that have like a mediocre flush draw. The thing about the turn is that if we have a mediocre flush draw, so if we have a hand, let's say we give ourselves, like, do we have 9-7, 9-6 off? We probably don't have 9-6 off. Let's give ourselves let's see if we can give ourselves 7-6 off. That might be in our button opening range here. No, it's not there. Okay, maybe we'll give ourselves 9-7 off. That might be in there. Yeah, we do have 9-7 off. Okay, so 9-7 off, even with the open ender plus the flush draw there, there's still a good chunk of turns that we're checking. There's a lot of stuff we pick up equity and we check. If we had, maybe if we even just look at Jack 9 offsuit here, we actually do bet quite a bit here. I guess 10-8 specifically is a bad example. If I was to look at like a low card flush draw board, so if it was like, instead of 10-8 deuce, if it was like 8-6 deuce, oops, let's go 8-6 deuce. So I'm thinking of having a 10 high flush draw on this board or something. The flop is going to be a reasonable flop to bet in a lot of cases, but barreling the turn with that type of hand will quite often put us in a position where we're actually blocking a lot of the stuff that they might be folding, right? So we want to be mindful of that in a lot of cases. And we want to pay attention to the fact that, oops, we want to give ourselves 10-9 on the turn to be just like a deuce of spades. That's fine. Even though the 10-9 has the gut shot here, like, we still want to be just mindful that a lot of the hands that they do fold on the turn to our aggression are going to be like mediocre club hands. Mm-hmm. So blocking those hands is not always going to be ideal. And if you look at the hands that are actually barreling the turn here, when we have our flush draw region is only barreling like half the time, right? A lot of our strong hands that have a flush card are barreling, like the ace high flush card is obviously barreling, especially when we have a low kicker. But you can see that something like 10 or 10-9 off is not highlighted here, but yeah, like the 10-9 with the 9 or the 10 of clubs, it seems like a trivial barrel hand here, but it's actually worse than 10-9 with no club. And it's because if we look at what they do against this B75 here, probably find that a lot of their folding hands have a middling club in them. Yeah, so they're folding a flush draw quite often. And it's a lot of this stuff, right? It's a lot of the jack high, queen high hands with one club. If we look at something like, if we just highlight the folding range, when they fold the turn, they actually have a flush draw more than a third of the time. So when they fold, they have a lot of even the jack of clubs, sometimes even the 5 of clubs. So this is why we actually have to find quite a few turn barrels that don't have clubs in them, right? We have to find some hands there that barrel this turn that are not flush draws. So if I go back to our strategy and I just look at like the nothing stuff, we're going to have some straight draws that bet, but you can see there's 10-3 of hearts is just barreling on this board, right? We take just like the absolute nothing, Jack 9 of the other suits, Jack 9 offsuit of the other suits, like some stuff that maybe has some pair outs, but is specifically unblocking a lot of that single club region. We have to find a lot of those bluffs on a turn like this. So these are good opportunities to really put some pressure on a lot of those middling clubs that, like you say, can't really withstand a second street of aggression. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. I think that's a good spot to wrap it up for now. So hopefully a bit more of a guide to how we're going to take these aggressive lines. Hopefully that all makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, man. Good luck. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man. See you.
See ya. Bye.